Welcome to another Town Hall Thursday. I am your host, Darryl W. Perry, Libertarian for Governor of New Hampshire, and I'm joined this week by Dr. Jo Jorgensen, the Libertarian presidential nominee. Dr. Jorgensen, thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us here.
Oh, so glad to be here. Anything for you, Darryl.
Now, a lot of people might not be aware of some of your history. In 1996, you were the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian, or the nominee. I guess there are a lot of candidates seeking the nomination, but there can be only one nominee. You were the nominee in 1996. And then in some libertarians' mind, you sort of faded into the background for a little bit of time. I realized you were focusing on family and work, where you're now a doctor of industrial psychology, I believe. You're a lecturer or senior lecturer. I don't want to get the title incorrect, at Clemson University. And now you are the presidential nominee, and hopefully we'll get 50 state plus DC ballot access. I know that we're wrapping things up here in New Hampshire, and we actually got some good news out of New Hampshire that I'm not sure if you're aware of.
No, I haven't. I'll let you be the first.
Yeah, so this actually came down a couple days ago where, as you might be aware, we had the lawsuit seeking some petitioning relief in New Hampshire because of the pandemic, the stay-at-home orders, and we got a 35% reduction in the number of petitions that are needed. Those are due to city and town clerks next Wednesday. I believe the petition drive should wrap up tomorrow, and then we'll start distributing so that we can get those passed out. I know petitions were turned in Maine on Monday. Me and my wife actually drove around for about 10 and a half hours on Monday, dropping some of those off. But you've got sort of your own little tour coming up where you're going to be driving around. So tell us about that.
Well, we start a 16-day bus tour in Pittsburgh Saturday. And we're going to start there because Pennsylvania is a critical state, and we've got to get ballot access there. And then we're going to basically kind of head south and west and head out to the western states.
And is there a tour schedule posted somewhere?
There should be. I don't even know what it is. It's like, if this is Tuesday, it must be Belgium. I kind of just show up where they tell me and meet whatever wonderful people I get to meet at that location.
Yeah, and the website is jo20.com. That's jo20.com. And going there, clicking on events, it actually says we're currently working on this. Go to the Facebook page to find events. So it should be somewhere, hopefully on the Facebook page, hopefully on the website soon. And I know that there's also the ballot drive that's wrapping up in Maryland, where you've got a lot of people doing call banking this week because Maryland is allowing electronic signatures.
Which is good and bad. I thought before, well, that makes it easy. But then somebody in Minnesota explained to me that a lot of people don't like doing it online for privacy reasons. So it might seem easier because you don't have to leave the comfort of your own home. But on the other hand, people don't like that electronic footprint. So
yeah. So let's actually jump into a conversation about sort of the topic of the day. And I guess there's really two big stories today. One of them is the GDP apparently dropping by somewhere around 10%, I think I saw. And the other is your competition saying he wants to delay the election. So I'll let you take whichever one of those you want to take and run with it.
Well, let's say the GDP, I mean, it's no surprise when the government puts us all under house arrest so that we can't get out there and do our jobs. We lost tens of millions of jobs. Many of them will never come back. And this is just one reason why we need a real change in Washington. And I've pointed out that there were over 60 different American companies creating testing kits. However, the FDA only originally allowed 2 of them to be sold. And all those other testing kits were going around the world helping other countries and not helping us. So American ingenuity isn't even allowed to help Americans.
Yeah, and I know one of the big things here in New Hampshire is, well, obviously the state government facing a giant deficit because they're not getting the tax revenues that they were expecting from our room and mills tax. But also you have where they're limiting certain restaurants to 50% capacity.
Yep.
And in a lot of places, they're putting in curfews saying that all businesses have to close at 10 o'clock, which the way I see it, and, like I'm far from a medical doctor, but if you shorten the amount of hours that people can be out, that just means that more people are going to be near one another when they are out.
Yes, I've thought that myself. In fact, they closed down the running trail in my town. They closed it down for, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks, something like that. And I thought, okay, so all the people who were going to be on that running trail are now going to be like downtown. It's like, wouldn't it be better to leave things open so people are spread out instead of now having everybody compacted? I guess they figure people will stay home, but we can only stay home for so long.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of running friends that, a couple of the running podcasts I listen to, that's one of the topics that comes up all the time is, they want to go running, but, this trail is closed. This other trail, they've got directions pointed. And one thing that I found interesting, the runners who you would think wouldn't necessarily see the signs telling them which direction to go were the ones following the directions, but the people that were walking on the trails were the ones walking in the opposite direction. And, so some of the runners, they're upset at the walkers because they don't want the trail to be completely shut down because some people aren't following the rule.
Right. Government at its finest. Right.
Yeah. And I'm sure you're aware, and I don't know exactly, what all has happened in South Carolina, but here in New Hampshire, there have been, a rollback of some regulations to where before sometime mid-March, restaurants that sold alcohol were not allowed to deliver any of that alcohol if they had a delivery order, or none of the alcohol could be given out in a takeout order. But because of, all of the restrictions, now bars and restaurants can have delivery alcohol and they can have takeout alcohol. Is that something you're seeing where you live?
Well, we've opened up, so that's good. For the most part. But, it's funny you mentioned about how they've got restricted hours, they're shutting down businesses, and then they're surprised when they don't get the revenues. It's almost like politicians think they're above the law of gravity, like reality somehow doesn't affect them or apply to them.
Yeah, and, I've not been paying attention to a lot of the national stuff, being a candidate for state office, plus everything that's going on. I'm trying to sort of focus what I'm looking at. As a presidential candidate, do you know, and feel free to say that's something that I've not looked into, but do you know if the expected deficit is going to be larger than what they had already planned the deficit to be?
Oh, I think so. But I mean, the point is it's going in the wrong direction. And whether it's a little worse or a lot worse, it's in the wrong direction. And what I haven't really talked about much because we've had so many other things is, when Congress does budgeting and they talk about their phony cuts, what they'll say often is, well, we're going to cut, from our budgeting, we're going to cut taxes, whatever, 30%. And what it is, well, actually, they never say that much, but 5%, whatever. And what it is they already had planned an increase. And so now what they're doing is they're not going to increase it as much. And so I have a friend who called it the Weight Watcher scale. You don't say, Well, I had all, let's see, I planned on gaining 10 pounds next month, but good news, I only gained 8 pounds. I lost 2 pounds. That's basically what they do with all of their projections and budgets. And here's what we're going to, here's how much we plan to increase versus how much they do.
So how would President Jorgensen handle budgeting? And I realize that the actual budgeting is handled by Congress, but the president always submits a budget. So how would President Jorgensen handle this?
Well, as I said, we would start with zero, okay, and work from there. Not start at some imaginary increase and call that zero. So we're going to have true zero budgeting, and then also. We hear a lot about how Ronald Reagan was for small government, and isn't it great? He was Republican for small government, and I've pointed this out to some Republicans that every year for 8 years, year after year after year, he increased spending even more than the previous year, and they say, well, but Congress wouldn't give him a balanced budget. Well, here's what he can do: is say, I'm not going to sign it.
Yeah.
Sharpen your pencils and come back, and then maybe I'll sign it. And that's exactly what I would do, is I would say, no. You need to go back and work on this just a little more.
And I'm guessing that you're not talking about only cutting from one section of, the discretionary spending, leave all the non-discretionary alone. And, well, let's just cut the military budget by $1 million out of the almost $1 trillion that they wind up getting annually.
Yeah, we've got so far to go, and it would be everywhere. I would start with the military. As you know, one of my platforms, one of my main points is I want to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. Of course, we need to protect our country, but there's no reason why we should be around the world. First of all, taxpayers in, let's say, Alabama, Iowa, or New Hampshire shouldn't be paying for Japan, Germany's, and France's military. And then also being in the Middle East just makes us less safe. And what's ironic is that the job of the military is to protect us, to make us more safe, not less safe. And if you look, our budget is greater than the next, depending on how you do the numbers, the next 7 to 10 countries combined. And we are in almost 150 countries around the world. And that is not only not helping, but it's very expensive. And it keeps the soldiers away from their families and creates all sorts of other problems. So we need to bring the troops home. Also, Social Security. It's beyond repair. What we need to do is the people whose money was taken against their will, before they even got their paycheck, it was not put in, to the lockbox like we were told by Al Gore, but instead it was spent to buy stuff that the government shouldn't be buying anyway, or upkeep or whatever. So what we do is we sell this stuff and give it back to the people who it rightfully belongs to, and then we stop the Social Security payments, and they'll be much better off because they'll be in control of their own dollars instead of being under the whims of Congress. So we can cut that out too, and just go right down the line. Why do we need a Department of Education? Education is a local issue. And why do we need to be sending free tanks to local police departments? Again, crime is a local issue. Assault, robbery, burglary, and that needs to be decided among local communities, the police, mayor, city council, taxpayers, voters, and not the federal government.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned sending tanks to local police, because
I like that one, Darryl.
it's something that I wanted to ask you about, is the 1033 program, and then there's another couple of programs, and I get confused exactly which one which does. I know one is the surplus military thing, and then another one is just like sending off the Bearcats, the ballistic engineered armored response counterattack trucks, made by Lenco, and Lenco only sells to governments. I know that there was legislation proposed in New Hampshire, unfortunately it didn't pass, that would have prevented the state or any subsidiary government from accepting or obtaining any equipment or, I forget the exact term, but it included weaponry plus these armored trucks that could not be obtained on the open market. And of course, the police unions came out dressed in their police uniforms, talking about all the horrible things that would happen if they couldn't get grenade launchers and all of these other cool toys from the feds. So instead of just ending this program, is there a way that the president could end it and then say, by the way, give us all the stuff back?
I would ask for it back. In fact, in one of our briefings last week, we were talking about kind of an angle, and we were talking about how we need to bring all that equipment back. And I jokingly said, well, we need to have a little picture of a tow truck, with the little tank on it. And so somebody put that on Facebook, I believe, and apparently it's gotten a lot of attention with repossessing our tanks. Yeah, if there's any way to get them back, we absolutely have to. But the least we can do is stop digging ourselves into a bigger hole. And also, Darryl, you make a good point. How the police are up there, asking the federal government for their tanks and tear gas. If they went to the voters, if they went to the mayor and said, let's put a referendum on the ballot. Let's ask the taxpayers if they want their taxes to go up so we can buy a tank. You know what would happen? The taxpayers aren't going to say no. We're not having our taxes raised so you can buy a tank.
Yeah. And I do have a question here in the Zoom. And if you are watching live, head over to darrellwperry.com/Zoom. You can leave your questions in the Zoom chat. Question from Robert Daniel, who's one of our state rep candidates here in New Hampshire. He says, defense question. The U.S. does face a serious and ongoing existential threat using stealth from foreign governments, in particular the Chinese Communist Party. This is a thorny issue for people who are ideologically libertarian, but what can you tell us about the extent of this threat and how you would address it?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if he means a military threat or patents. I mean, of course, we need to protect what's ours. I'd like to point out that the best way to keep a good relationship with other countries is free trade. And we cannot get into a war with China. We could obliterate each other. We have to play nice with each other. And I'd like to point out that, well, actually, let me give you a quick story here. In the early 1980s, I had some man come over to me. I just parked my car and he was glaring at me and I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. I thought, oh geez, did I cut him off? I thought I was driving okay. And he comes over and I can see he's kind of glaring at my car more than me. And he says, and he tells me that he's a veteran of World War II. And how dare I drive an Italian car after what they did to us? Now, of course, being a serviceman and of course, giving, being willing to sacrifice his life for our country. Of course, I didn't want to get into an argument with him, but if we're buying cars from Italy, they're not going to bomb us.
Right.
I see there's another.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree that, if we are buying the cars from Italy, they don't want to bomb us. One of the things, and I realize it's not an overt act of war, but embargoes are a covert act of war.
Well, infiltrating U.S. companies and so forth. Well, my hope is that once the Japanese, or not the Japanese, the Chinese, I'm thinking World War II in my head, once the Chinese come over to our country, I'm hoping they'll love it enough that they'll decide to stick around and not go back to their country and see how great it is here. But yes, that of course is a concern for us to protect our secrets.
And question from someone on Facebook. Thank you to my wonderful wife for sending those questions over to the Zoom from Facebook. Shane asks, or actually says, hope to see some campaign events in New England scheduled soon. Do you know if that's something? I realize you have a team working on this.
Yes, well, and let me mention, I think New Hampshire was the first place I went to, although it's hard to keep track. I already was in the New England area earlier. I believe there are plans for us to go again in October, but it's kind of wait and see. But we'll see. I'm hoping to get up there again. And New Hampshire just always treats me so well. And I've mentioned this a few times. When I was the VP nominee in 1996, not like I was there for weeks or months, but I was there for several days. I was there longer in New Hampshire than pretty much any other state. So.
And New Hampshire, this is an issue that is very relevant here because all of New Hampshire is in the border zone, the 100-mile buffer around the borders, which means that the Border Patrol often will set up checkpoints on Interstate 93. And they're often with about 35 miles from the Canadian border. So unless you want to drive way out of the way and you're coming from the North Country, you pretty much have to drive through this checkpoint. I know that there's been discussion about dropping the border zone from 100 miles down to 25 miles. What, I know that the preferred libertarian answer is 0 miles. But what do you think could actually wind up going through Congress, or is this something that the president could just do with the stroke of a pen in an executive order?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, libertarians don't like the idea of using executive orders because that really wasn't something in the Constitution. And I, however, don't see any problem with using an executive order to get rid of other unconstitutional executive orders. And then once that's done, let's get rid of those. But that's a good question. I'm not sure exactly how much power the president has, but versus the other. But you're right. The libertarian philosophy is let's have open borders and welcome the people who are going to make our country great. And there is so much misinformation out there. A lot of people thinking, well, they're just coming here for the benefits. Well, a lot of the federal benefits don't even kick in until you've been here for 5 years. And if you look at the numbers, people who are born on foreign soil actually use fewer benefits than people who are born on American soil. And looking at crime, again, there's a higher percentage of people committing crimes who are born on our soil than foreign soil. So there's just a lot of misinformation because that's what the media does.
Yep. And there's a couple more questions we'll get to. I just want to add one more thing about the internal border checkpoints, where I forget if it was last year or 2 years ago, but anyway, within the not too distant past, the New Hampshire Supreme Court actually issued what was a good ruling, saying that local police could not assist the feds in those checkpoints because they didn't jump through the proper authorizations, and they had the drug dogs out. So what was supposed to be an immigration checkpoint turned into basically just a let's look for drugs checkpoint. And so, that's at least one step in the right direction. But then there was another issue completely unrelated to that, where someone who was held in ICE detention, where the federal court issued a court order prohibiting ICE from deporting this guy, deported him in October. He was then placed in jail in El Salvador and has basically, been treated absolutely horribly, lost a whole bunch of weight. The ACLU represented him in a hearing last week, and I said, sorry, we deported him. So they violated a court order, but there's no punishment. What could be done on that?
And can I, I think one of the most egregious ones, you brought that up about no accountability. Back with Janet Reno in Waco, I remember her getting on TV and saying, "I'll take full responsibility." It's like, okay, Janet, are you going to get fired? Are you going to be tried? Are you going to go to prison? What do you mean I'm going to take full responsibility? I guess her idea of full responsibility is to say, oh, I'm sorry, my bad, as opposed to real accountability. And that's one reason that the libertarians are so much in favor of the free markets, because there's so much more accountability, that if you don't do your job, if you don't please the customer, you go out of business. The way that companies are able to stay in business not pleasing the customer right now is by getting help from the government, getting protectionist laws or help in tariffs or tax credits or whatever.
Yeah, so let's jump into some of these questions.
Oh, while you're looking, do you mind if I noticed there was an announcement earlier about the fact that Maryland is doing signatures. And I know, if you don't mind, I'd like to just mention this. We can maybe mention it.
Go ahead.
But about Maryland, one of the upsides is that people across the country can help. So if you go to jo20.com, that's jo20.com, and click volunteer, and be sure to check make phone calls, and then they can be a phone bank volunteer, and then hopefully we can get the signatures that we need. And the deadline is Monday, I'm told. I don't keep up with all the deadlines, but I'm told the deadline is Monday, and maybe we can make a huge push and get this thing done.
Yeah, and you do have a few other things that you have to worry about. So, nobody's going to fault you for not keeping up with the deadlines. Justin O'Donnell, who is our U.S. Senate candidate here in New Hampshire, posted on Facebook that he could understand maybe a 500-foot border zone for government buildings and stuff like that, but otherwise, none of these internal checkpoints. He actually got stopped at one of these a couple of years ago and got some media attention for that. He also has a ballot access update live stream that should be starting about now, I believe, on his Facebook page. So if you want to go catch that live, you can catch the rest of this later on YouTube. And another Justin says, hello, Dr. Joe. What is your plan for the abolition of the Federal Reserve and the transition back to sound money?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I would audit and then abolish the Fed. I would go ask Ron Paul who he recommends be in charge of the Fed while we're figuring out how to get rid of it. And as far as money, again, the free market can do a much better job than government. So we would open it up to whatever currency you like. And I've had some people say, what about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency? Yeah, that's fine. And in fact, I would expand it even further and say that, we hear stories in the olden days about how people would bring chickens to their doctor, to pay for their health care. Hey, if you want to accept chickens as currency, that's your right. That's what a free society looks like.
Yeah, and my wife, who's an economics major, has told me a story. I believe it was in Poland, one of the former Soviet bloc countries, where they were using a dozen eggs, I believe it was, as sort of the standard. And once that price stabilized is when they knew that, things were heading in the right direction. Someone, Shane, asked on Facebook, beyond ending the wars and bringing the troops home, what will Dr. Jorgensen do to help prevent suicides among military veterans? 22 a day is too many.
Well, and let me add, he's right. 22 a day is too many. And I would suggest 1 a day is too many. And part of the problem is that they are based around the world. They are seeing things that they should have never seen. I was just in, let me think of whatever state I was in most recently. I've been going around so much, and Wisconsin, and somebody there was telling me how, excuse me, how, he was stationed over there, and he said, it's bad. People don't know what's going on. And there are some stuff that I will never be able to unsee. So first of all, how about let's not put them in the position to begin with, okay? And then secondly, rather than giving them the monopolistic VA healthcare system, I say put the dollars in their own pockets. So, and let me back up. We keep hearing politicians, you know, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, we need Medicare for all. Whenever I hear the term Medicare for all, what I think is VA hospital for all. And I'd like to know why all of a sudden, especially people on the left, are for monopolies. They're the ones who've been saying that monopolies are bad, that monopolies don't listen to people. And a government monopoly won't listen to people any better than a corporate monopoly would, because they don't have to, because they're a monopoly. So what we need to do is literally put dollars into the pockets of veterans, just as they do for the state employees in Indiana. And then they get to choose their health care. They get to choose where they go and what services they want with their purchasing power. And hopefully we can get a free market going, a true free market in which prices will go down accordingly.
And one thing that I'll add to this is we need to destigmatize mental health, because there's a lot of people that think if anybody has any kind of mental health problems, there's something wrong with them. Seeking help for mental problems is somehow looked down upon. I don't know what happened with Will Smith recently, but apparently there's a picture of him crying that's been circulated, making fun of him. And I've seen a lot of people saying, the picture of Will Smith crying being circulated, mocking him, just shows that men's emotions are not taken seriously. And when you add in people that were or are in the military having mental problems, that's even stigmatized even more if they admit that they have problems and they couldn't hack war.
Yep. Oh yeah, and it's something that no human being should be exposed to. And let me mention that I'm not directly in the mental health field now. However, my PhD is in industrial organizational psychology, and I recently earned an MSW, and I've worked at a couple of behavioral health centers. Basically, in fact, I actually worked in the VA hospital as an undergrad for a psychology internship at the VA hospital in Waco, Texas. And, it's really frustrating how people look at mental illness as being so different from physical illness when there's usually a physical reason for that. If we look at depression, we've got lower activity in the frontal lobes. Schizophrenia, we've got the brain looks different. And just, hormones and chemicals and all sorts of things. And I saw one of my favorite PSAs was a little commercial, like where people are sitting around at a restaurant and somebody obviously like chokes or has a heart attack or something, and he falls to the floor, and everybody around is going, oh, do we say anything? Do we help them? Do we, showing like how ridiculous it is. You would never do that if somebody were having a heart attack, but,
right.
but something wrong with your brain. Well, now, maybe we don't talk about that.
Yeah. And I'm also guessing that we shouldn't be bragging about passing a cognitive assessment that generally is only given to people that the doctor has some kind of reason to think that they have a cognitive defect. That's sort of a digression there. I've taken the same test that the president bragged about taking because I've suffered multiple concussions, and I'm still dealing a year later with some cognitive neurological problems with that. There's actually a lot of questions coming in. Jorge asks, will you allow us to escort you to the debate stage if they don't allow you on?
Well, libertarians do not believe in force. And unfortunately, this is a private organization, even though it shouldn't be. It is a private organization, and so we need to respect their rights. Now, it's totally crooked. However, it is private. But what you can do in the meantime is tell all your friends. If a pollster calls, even if you're not sure you're going to vote for me, tell them tell them you do plan on voting for me so I can get to the 15% and I can be escorted in by the Democrats and Republicans. That would be a much better escort.
I've got two that I'm just going to say are lightning round, so just very quick yes, no. Will you pardon all nonviolent offenders that are in federal prison on day one?
Absolutely.
Does the F-35 suck?
That's what I've heard.
Next question here. Someone asked if you're still planning to go to Annapolis, Maryland. They heard a rumor that it may have been canceled and you're going to DC instead.
I don't know. It would be on my website. I'm sorry. Like I said, today's Tuesday. It must be Belgium.
Yep. And today's actually Thursday.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a pandemic. Everything's running together. You're forgiven.
You're too young from that. That was a movie back in the 60s.
Jimmy asked on Facebook, is the campaign reaching out to the mainstream media?
As much as we can. However, we know that they're not. We know that they're not going to treat us fairly, and in fact, they already have not treated us fairly. And so we are trying to make an end run around and go to social media. But yes.
Jacob McKetchin asked also on Facebook, and I'm reading this verbatim. He says, "What are your thoughts on the outrageous defund the police movement?"
I'm running for federal office, and one of our problems is that the federal government gets too involved with local issues, and I'm going to leave it up to, again, the local citizens to decide how they want to do it, and we'll see. Now, I will tell you this, I will defund the police from the federal level. I'm not going to be giving them tanks, but like I said, part of our problem is federal government gets into everything. They get into education, they get into policing, they get into, well, retirement, healthcare, everything, and so many things. And by the way, charity, you know, charity, even though it was run through the government, which is a very inefficient way to do it, it really was doing a pretty good job until the federal government got involved. So I'll leave that up to the localities.
C.A. Ortegon ask if he can have an M16A2 rifle.
If he wants one under my administration. I would get rid of every gun law in the last 100 years that I could, and I would try to put a stop to this, these red flag laws, which are an egregious assault on our liberties, because it's basically taking away a constitutional right without a fair trial.
Robert asked if you've given any consideration to who you might tap for executive appointments, such as Supreme Court, advisors, etc., when you become president. And I know that there are hundreds of things that the president gets to appoint, but are you starting to make a list and check it twice?
Haven't checked it twice yet. In a debate, I said I would tap Jacob Hornberger. Again, I would still ask him. So that would be my short list for Supreme Court. For a cabinet post, well, first of all, we're going to get rid of a lot of them. So we won't need, you know, we won't be sending out as many employment forms as previous administrations, but I would go directly to Cato, Reason, and some other places. The first person I would look to is Michael Tanner at Cato for help with that.
Terry Plummer on Facebook asked, and again, thank you to my lovely wife for bringing those questions over. That way I don't have to try monitoring two different chats. Terry asked if Mama Jo has the same views on the Federal Reserve as Ron Paul.
Yeah, I don't know of any way that we differ. There might be some way, but not that I know of.
Jorge asked, and he prefaces with saying it doesn't matter to a lot of people, but a lot of people have asked him, and he wants to be able to provide an answer. Are you a Christian? Again,
I don't get into religion because that's part of our problem, is that the government gets too involved. However, I will say that the Libertarian platform for decades has been that we shouldn't get involved. In fact, one of the things that we mentioned since 1972 is that we would allow gay marriage because it's up to the person's religion. If you belong to a religion that allows it, great. If you belong to a religion that doesn't allow it, great. So we need to get out of the mindset of it matters what the president thinks. And along those lines, I'd like to mention, my goal is to get a government so small that if you forget to vote on the first Tuesday in November, it doesn't matter because your life goes on. You still get your choice in healthcare, your choice in education, your choice in retirement, and you don't have to fight it out with everybody else for what you want.
Adrian Garcia asked if you can explain how a free market will move against systemic racism when the government had to step in during the 1970s.
Oh, well, I would say the government is the one that started it. So we've all heard the Rosa Parks story of the Black woman who was asked to sit at the back of the bus, and she said, enough already, I'm not going to do this. And she was treated as a hero. What a lot of people don't know is that that bus was a government-owned, government-run bus. Only the government can discriminate and get away with it. At the time, 60% of the ridership were Blacks. So, let's take that to today. Let's say, you're Uber. You own the Uber company. What if you discriminated against your best 60%, your best customers, and you
Boycott.
said, well, I'm sorry?
Boycott.
Yeah. Well, you'd go out of business. I mean, if that's how you treated your best customers, you would go out of business as well they should. And only the government has been able to do that. And let's actually go back to when the slaves were freed. Within 10 years, they were prospering because they were excellent craftsmen. They'd been doing all the work, so they knew what they were doing, and they were starting in business. And so, like most people, when they start in business, they offer better prices. That's what I did when I started in business. And they were going around offering wonderful services for great prices. And so the whites said, what can we do to stop this? And so then they started passing all sorts of laws, and now you got to have whatever education level to put in a hot water heater that has nothing to do with it. So it's been the government that's been at the forefront. And last, I'd like to point out that Milton Friedman pointed out that if he were a baker and he could buy flour from a white person versus flour from a Black person, he would get the cheaper prices. And the Black person could offer cheaper prices, great, go with that. Now, could you discriminate? Of course. You could buy you could buy flour at higher prices from the white person, but you keep doing that, you're not going to make as much of a profit, and you might go out of business. And last, I'd like to point out, and this isn't racism, but this is still individual rights. Disney Company in the early 90s started offering benefits to the spouses of their gay employees because they wanted to retain their employees. They want, again, free market, they're competing for the best employees. So they said, come on, work for us. We will give you benefits for your gay partner, even though the government is against it. And yet 20 years later, 2012, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were still against gay marriage. So that just shows you how the free market does such a much better job than the government at protecting individual rights.
And lots of questions coming in. Jackie, please stop posting. We're not getting to all of these. I do thank everybody that's been asking questions.
Yeah, and let me mention, I know I went long on that last one, but that is such an important point. And so many people don't know that, they just assume it was some evil corporation who made Rosa Parks sit in the back of the bus. No, that was
right. And, most people forget the last word of Jim Crow was Jim Crow laws.
Yes.
It was the state dictating that the water fountains had to be segregated. It was the state dictating that the lunch counters had to be segregated. It was the state, in a lot of cases, dictating that Jesse Owen had to go through a completely different entrance into the buildings, even when he was the person being honored at certain ceremonies. And if you've not watched the movie The Race, which is about Jesse Owen, I highly recommend it. to where, if you're not familiar with Jesse Owen, he was a black track star that completely humiliated Hitler in 1936 in Berlin, Germany. And he actually faced a lot of backlash from his own community about even going to Berlin, because a lot of people, including the head of the NAACP, said, Jesse, if you go, you're condoning everything that's happening over there. But he also got a lot of pressure to go and show that, Hitler's, Aryan race wasn't the superior race. Yep. And so, there was a lot of pressure on him to make sure that he only won gold medals, which he did. Yep. Next question is, how do you, I know it's something in here about the surveillance state. So the NSA and a lot of the programs that Edward Snowden revealed going on 7 years ago.
Yeah. Edward Snowden is on my list to pardon on the first day. The NSA and the CIA are both beyond repair. I would get rid of both of them and have whatever small military surveillance we needed within the military.
A lot of questions on how to meet you, and Jackie again suggests people go to jo20.com. That's jo20.com. Click on events, get the list of cities, and right now it's saying go to the list of Facebook events. Someone says, if you can't get on the debate stage, will you have a separate live stream to rebut the duopoly in real time?
We haven't discussed that, but that certainly sounds like a very good idea to me.
And that's something that John Anderson actually did in 1980 during the one debate that he wasn't allowed in. And C-SPAN actually did this sort of semi-live, semi-delayed stream where they started off live at the League of Women Voters debate. That's who hosted them back then. They started live there, gave the Republican and Democratic answer, John Anderson answered, and then they went to the delay from the League of Women Voters that I believe was on ABC, and he gave his answer. So it was this, hybrid sort of situation. And I think that with the technology that we have now, to where, even 24 years ago when you were running for vice president, these sorts of live interviews weren't necessarily possible. Back then, you would have had to have you would have had to have found a television station that was amenable to letting you use their studio, and then they've had to have a satellite hookup to whoever you were talking to, and hopefully everything worked. But the technology is absolutely wonderful right now that allows us to do this. There's about 10 minutes left. And again, if you need to leave before.
Yeah, not quite 10, because I actually do have another interview lined up that I have to sign in on. But yeah.
So let me find a question here. Here's one about the drug war. Question from Brendan Francis McClellan. And again, thank you everybody that asked questions. Apologies that we did not get to all of these. He says, will you legalize harder drugs, aside from just cannabis, to include things such as heroin, cocaine, and ecstasy?
Everything. An inanimate object is, for lack of a better phrase, if there is no victim, there is no crime. How is somebody using whatever drug in his or her own home doing any more harm than me drinking bourbon in my home?
Yeah, and obviously neither one of us were alive 110 years ago when you could actually get heroin and cocaine delivered to your house from Sears and Roebuck.
Yes, and ecstasy wasn't, MDMA was not illegal till 1984. In fact, marriage therapists used to use that as part of their therapy.
Yeah, it was the love drug, I believe.
Exactly, the love drug.
Let's see here. Here's a question, and if you don't get the reference, I can explain. What would a handshake or what would your handshake strategy be against Donald Trump?
Oh, but because he doesn't shake hands, mean?
No, he does this thing to where he always grabs the other person's hand and pulls them in. He does the power move of yanking them into him.
Maybe I could learn a jujitsu move. I don't know, but that's something good to think about. We will have to remember to prepare for that if I'm on the stage. So thank you for that.
You could go the Howie Mandel route and do fist bumps, which he started doing that a long time ago, just because he's a germaphobe. So it started, long before the COVID thing of social distance, try not to touch as many things. Fist bump. I'd go with fist bump myself. Robert says, don't shake hands with him for anything. See Joker in Batman 1988. I don't remember the Batman movie from 1988. I probably saw it, but the only good Batman movies were the Dark Knight series, in my opinion. Joe, I understand that you do have to go. So any final thoughts that you have for anybody?
I would just say, well, I'd like to point out, I don't think I've pointed this out yet, the good news that about 75% of our volunteers are from outside the Libertarian Party. And it's been that way pretty much from the start, which is pretty unheard of. And there are just so many people who are fed up with things. So if you like what you're hearing, check us out at jo20.com. That's jo20.com. And also, if you get polled, please tell them you're going to vote for me so I can get into the debates. And if nothing else, vote for me in November. I'd really appreciate your vote. So thanks so much, Darryl, and thank you for all your support in the campaign.
Yep, Joe, again, thank you for your time. And I'm going to continue myself for a couple more minutes, so feel free to go ahead and leave. Jackie wants me to mention that we'll send the Facebook thread to your social media team so that they can answer additional questions, hopefully that you weren't able to answer live. And again, if you do want to help with phone banking to finalize that Maryland petition drive, you can go to jo20.com, click volunteer. Be sure that you check that you are willing to make phone calls when you fill out the form, and someone from the phone banking team will get you set up to be a phone banking volunteer. Again, the deadline is Monday. They have a list of about 20,000 voters that are sympathetic to the Libertarian Party, that obviously you're not going to be expected to call all 20,000, but if you call just 5 people, that's 5 fewer that somebody else has to call. Deadline is Monday, meaning that there's about 3 more days to get this done. Huge push being made this weekend to finish everything off. Again, jo20.com. Click volunteer, click make phone calls. And if you want to help with the Darryl Perry campaign, go to darrylwperry.com/volunteer. And that's where you can fill out the volunteer form. Let me know what it is that you're willing and able to do. Again, we are almost completely wrapped up with our petition drive. I understand that the petition team is making sort of a 1 or 2 more day effort to just sort of get an extra buffer in the number of signatures that we need. And then petitions will be delivered across the state on probably Tuesday, Wednesday. They're due Wednesday. I think some people are dropping those off on Monday as well. Again, darrylwperry.com/volunteer. And if you would like to donate to the campaign, darrylwperry.com/donate. We're at almost $8,000 right now. And I really want to not only do some social media ads, but I also want to get I'm drawing a blank here on what it's called, a billboard. I want to get a billboard, possibly also get a big giant ad put in one of the bus stops, either in front of the State House or the Manchester City Hall. where a lot of people walk up and down Elm Street, right by City Hall in Manchester. So anything that you can do to help there, darrylwperry.com/donate. I do have some t-shirts to send out to everybody that donates over $50 or $50 or more. Where originally I was trying to sell them, now I'm just going to send to everybody that donates $50 or more, darrylwperry.com/donate. And again, we do these town hall Thursdays every Thursday. That's why it's in the title. Next week, I have somebody. I don't remember off the top of my head. Let me pull up my schedule. Next week, I have Justin O'Donnell. In 2 weeks, I have Robert Daniel. And then in 3 weeks, I have Joe's running mate, Spike Cohen. So that's who I've got coming up over the next few weeks. And again, if you do have questions during the live streams, I answer those when they're put in Zoom. This is also live streamed on Facebook, so everybody watching on Facebook or later on YouTube, thank you very much. And yeah, unless anybody has a specific question for me that they can post in the chat in about the next minute or so, I will say sayonara, but I will give people time to type very quickly. And I am not seeing anything. And a big, huge thank you. And if you're watching, give a round of applause silently to my wife, Jackie Perry, for monitoring the Facebook thread and then bringing comments and posting in the Zoom so that I could see those. And again, everybody in the Zoom, thank you very much. Have a good night. I'll be back next week.